Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be talking to us about the Nigerian story, which is a joint work with Jim Saki, Liverpool Tase, and Dr. Taiwa Aweyemi. I also want to acknowledge the support we got from Emily and Elena on this project. I'm going to follow this outline. Structural, a lot has been said about different angles from which structural transformation can be looked at. And it's clear that it involves movement of economic activities and people from agriculture, the rural sector, to the urban industrial and service sector. And according to Tim and Akus, these are usually reflected in these four patterns. We see a declining share of agriculture in the GDP and the share of agricultural employment too, which means that productivity increase in agriculture will free some labor to the modern industrial and service sector through, among others, rural-urban migration and demographic transition. But Nigeria's story provides striking contrast to this pattern. Although the share of agriculture in the GDP and employment did decline, but it was not because productivity increased in the agricultural sector. It was due to the discovery of the oil, which made the government to shift focus from agriculture to oil. These shares also flattened and rose post-1980 when the oil price boom crashed. During this same period, the service sector continued to grow, but as a result, the growth was as a result of the growth in the informal sector, because most of the migrants end up in the informal sector. And because of urbanization. Nigeria continued to urbanize despite falling incomes in the 90s and 2000s. But despite this erratic pattern in the economic growth and stagnant agricultural productivity, Nigeria is still regarded as one of the most urbanized countries in Africa. Between 1963 and 2006, the share of urban population increased dramatically from about 19% to 49%. But looking at the agglomeration index, which measures the percent of people living in or near areas of at least 50,000 population, we see that in 1991, it gives a slightly lower figure. In 1991, it was 30.8%, but that increased to about 41% in 2000. This increase is actually associated with the growth in the major cities and growth of agglomerated areas. We are going to see that in the slide. And Nigeria is also one country in Africa with a mega city. An example is the Lagos. And Nigeria also has a lot of secondary and tertiary cities. About 11 cities in Nigeria have population of between 500 to 900,000 people, and 35 cities of about 100 to about 500,000 people. Another component of the implication of this lower figure from the agglomeration index is that people who are considered to be living in urban areas by the administrative boundary might actually not be living in urban area. Another component of the agglomeration index is a measure of connectedness to the urban center, which is supposed to offer one of the agglomeration rent in the form of reduced time and transport costs to the market. The brown in this figure, the brown areas represent travel time less than 1% to a city of about 50,000, at least 50,000 people. And we can see that there are north-south divide. This graph is showing what I've earlier mentioned. The two figures are showing the agglomerated areas. If you look at this side, where we have Lagos moving towards Ifo, Abekuta to Igbora in 1991, when you compare it to what we have here, you can see that the agglomerated area is actually expanding. The same is also true for Ibadan to Oyo and Iseyin up there. Just like Ghana and Uganda, Nigeria has a long history of migration. During the pre-colonial era, where we have a lot of kingdoms, there were a lot of migration happening. Seasonal variation in the climate usually make the nomads to move from the north to the south to graze the animal and also to escape the impact of sesafly. Among the Igbos, these people from the southeastern Nigeria, they have high population density and their lands are highly degraded. So they move out to relieve pressure on land. The wars among the Yorubas also caused a lot of people to move to areas where they considered safe. But we also observe that most of this migration used to be temporary. Since they just move during the dry season and during the rainy season, you move back. But for the nomads, a lot of them are actually settling down now in the south because of expansion in the sesafly-free area. This happened up until the colonial intervened in the provision of good transport network, road and rail system, and also the coming up of mining enclave and plantation. So that changed the direction of labor movement in Nigeria. But as soon as the oil was discovered, the oil also, that's post-independent, the oil accelerated the rural-urban migration via wage inflation. The oil revenue also expanded government budgets, and government made a lot of investment to education. So the universal education policy has made a lot of people to move to town. And it's also responsible for increasing feminization of migration to the urban center in Nigeria. We found out that in one of our paper with my paper with Valerie Muela and Andrew Dillon. But the oil, the boom has gone. But we still see people migrating, even though we don't have enough data to substantiate this fact. So one hypothesis is that maybe the rural push factor are making a lot of people to migrate out of the rural area. An example is the increasing population land ratio and the serious underemployment arises from seasonal variation in agriculture. And this is also being compounded by the lack of infrastructural facilities in the rural area. What are the effects of this trend? Nigeria has an unbalanced demography. So evidence from the 2000 DHS survey shows that we have a lot of women, younger children, and older people, because the migrants are men of working age. So that has actually created a change in the division of labor. Tasks that men ordinarily would do are now being done by women and children. And this also created labor shortages, which is being filled by hired labor, and it's causing a lot of seasonal intra-rural migration, and has also increased livelihood diversification. I think this is very common to, if not all, but African countries, that it's difficult to find a survey measuring employment at similar survey measuring employment at regular intervals. So what we have here is various estimates from census surveys showing agricultural employment share in Nigeria. But the message is that between 1960, from the table you can see that between 1960 and to the 80s, we can see that the share of employment, agricultural employment share, actually fell from between 60 and 1970, and it rose again. But from the 90s, you can see that it has been fairly stable. In 1991, it was 45%, and in 2006, about 40%. For other sectors, our services dominate the non-farm employment. As we can see from the table, non-farm employment in 2004, these are estimates from the National Living Standards Survey, was about 34.8% for urban and about 15.3%. So this means that a lot of Nigerians are actually employed in low productivity activity. And the unemployment is also high, 11.6 for urban and about 6% for the rural area. The story is somewhat similar to the share of output in the GDP. It's from between 1960 and 1980, it actually declined and started to increase from 1990 to 2008. And if you look at the growth rate, that's the table below, we can see that in the 2000, the share of agriculture in the GDP has been increasing at about 11%. So also the private services and so what we try to do is to now explain, using the non-farm and at the same time the farm agricultural development strategy, to explain this pattern. I said earlier that the discovery of oil changed the development priority and had a negative impact, negative impact on agricultural output. Foreign exchange from oil also changed the structure of the domestic demand in favor of imported goods, which affected the linkage that's supposed to be between agriculture and industry. This coupled with the challenges faced by the industrial sector also perpetuated these weak linkages. But at the same time, there was an upsurge in the urban demand for goods. And this can only be met either by increasing productivity or by importation. And from the graph, you can see that food imports have the similar pattern with the export of crude oil in Nigeria. Apart from the impact of oil, the import substitution industrialization policy promoted the import dependency syndrome, because tariffs for finished goods were raised, while duties on raw materials were reduced. And by the end of 1960, about 70% of country's total import were capital equipment. So that prevented strong linkage between industry and agriculture. As of 1984, Nigeria had about 9 operating cement companies. But yet, the country was not self-sufficient and dependent on import of cement and raw material. This would have actually increased employment in the construction company. But this company depend on importation, and they face a lot of problems with foreign exchange, so most of them closed down. The policy also encouraged the ISI policy, along with the indigenization policy, which changed the ownership of most of these foreign companies, encouraged the government to intervene, and this undermined private sector investment. The government intervention or investment were largely inefficient. They shifted focus from a light industry to heavy industry like steel, petrochemical, nitrogen and phosphorus plants for production of fertilizer. Trade liberalization did also help. It fostered the importation of cheap finished products. And fostered the importation of a lot of cheap finished goods, which competes with the domestic products. Infrastructure is very important to economic growth, human capital development. Studies by FAN and RAW in 2008 showed that public investment in agricultural research, rural education, and infrastructure can improve productivity, and they have direct impact on increased income. In Nigeria, in 2001, unreliable cost of power supply imposed an additional cost of about 3% to the economy. Electricity supply remains a major policy concern among the manufacturing sector in the country. The agricultural strategy too have not helped matter. Government encouraged large farm experiments, but didn't work. Subsidy, a lot of money is being spent on subsidy, but most of these subsidies have missed the farmer. Although we have some current efforts, Nigeria is trying to experiment with the voucher system to ensure that the intended beneficiary, this smallholder farmer, have access to fertilizer. And as we can see from the table, government expenditure on agriculture in the 1990s and 30s is low compared to the education. But this does not include spending from the subnational government, and does not include quality of spending. We can also see that poverty have fluctuated, and in 2004 was put at 54%. But poverty is still more widespread in the rural area compared to urban. Inequality also increased up to 96, but I think it's reducing. But it's reducing faster in the urban area than in the rural area. So these are our conclusions. The development outcomes in Nigeria contrast with standard transformation processes. The trickle-down effect of urban growth on rural areas has not yet happened, and the widening differences in access to social and infrastructure services continue to drive rural-urban migration. The informal sector absorbs most of these migrants, but poses a great challenge to urban poverty. Looking forward, given the large population size, big cities, and reasonable market access, how can we get more growth in the manufacturing, including agro-processing and non-farm sector? How can we get better linkages between rural and urban areas and agricultural and non-agricultural sector? Can agriculture, employment, and entrepreneurship be made attractive for young people? Thank you.